"We want Trump to succeed on Friday," said German Chancellor Friedrich Merz after his conversation with Donald Trump. Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelensky was also working in Berlin, and together with Merz, they spoke with the American president by phone. Before that, they held a virtual conference with European leaders. The main goal was to coordinate a common position ahead of Friday's negotiations between Trump and Putin in Alaska. Zelensky arrived in Berlin this afternoon. All the details coming up from Natalia Freiberg.
They wished Donald Trump success at his meeting with Putin. The Europeans coordinated key negotiating positions with the American president and said that Donald Trump generally agreed with them and promised not to make any deals with Putin without considering the interests of the Europeans. At the meeting in Alaska, the fundamental security interests of Ukraine and Europe must be taken into account, said German Chancellor Friedrich Merz after his conversation with Trump.
In Alaska, the discussion should focus on the fundamental security interests of Ukraine and Europe. That was the message we communicated to the American president today. We also made it clear that Ukraine must have a seat at the negotiating table if there is another meeting after this one. We want the right order of things. That means a ceasefire first, and that has to come right at the very beginning. An important element could be a framework agreement, which would come later.
First, a ceasefire, and only then can the conversation continue. This was stated by the president of Ukraine, Volodymyr Zelensky. He also maintains his position that there can be no recognition of the occupied territories because that would contradict the constitution of Ukraine.
The format of the negotiations. Everything that concerns Ukraine must be discussed exclusively with Ukraine. We need to prepare a trilateral format for the talks. There must be a ceasefire. This is number one. The security guarantees must be truly reliable. Today, by the way, President Trump expressed his support for this and America's willingness to participate. Also among the agreed principles, Russia cannot have a veto over Ukraine's European and NATO prospects. And peace negotiations should be combined with proper pressure on Russia. Sanctions must be in place and should be strengthened if Russia does not agree to a ceasefire in Alaska.
If territories are to be discussed, the only starting point can be the line of contact. Friedrich Merz added this. According to the Ukrainian president, all partners demonstrated a united position. Volodymyr Zelensky arrived in the German capital this afternoon. The decision for this visit was made only yesterday evening, and the Berlin police barely had enough time to organize the highest level of security. And first, there was a bilateral meeting with Chancellor Friedrich Merz, followed by online negotiations with European leaders from France, Italy, Finland, the United Kingdom, Poland, as well as the President of the European Commission, Ursula von der Leyen, and NATO Secretary General Mark Rutte. Zelensky and Merz participated together. The negotiations took place in a situation center of the Chancellery, closed off from outside eyes. Then there was a separate segment, a video conference with U.S. President Donald Trump and Vice President J.D. Vance. And this was the highest level of secrecy, with no interpreters present. Everyone spoke English, and phones had to be left in special boxes to prevent any eavesdropping. And after the public statements, the work continued. The leaders joined the next video conference of the Coalition of the Willing. These are countries led by Germany, France, and the United Kingdom, which must be ready to ensure the implementation of the peace plan. However, as for what specific security guarantees Europe is currently prepared to offer Ukraine, they say that was not discussed today. Reporting from Berlin, Natalia Freiberg and Denis Savchenko, TSN 1+1.
If the defense forces withdraw from Donbass, it will create the preconditions for a new war because for the Russians, Donbass is a springboard for an offensive, and we will not leave from there. Volodymyr Zelensky stated this during a meeting with journalists. The head of state is convinced. At the upcoming summit in Alaska, Trump and Putin will raise territorial issues and talk about supposed concessions that should be made by both sides, Ukraine and Russia. But according to the president, this is a matter of our constitution, and as the head of state, he is not ready to discuss exchanging territories. Zelensky's plan is as follows. First and foremost, a ceasefire, and after that, discussion and resolution of security guarantees from the US, Russia, and Europe. And during the upcoming trilateral meetings, the discussion will not only be about peace in Ukraine, but also about concrete timelines for our membership in the European Union and NATO. Meanwhile, the Russians have started commenting on information about alleged agreements on territorial exchanges. In particular, Fadiv, a representative of the foreign ministry of the aggressor country, has already assured that Russia will not agree to withdraw its troops from the Kherson and Zaporozhye regions of Ukraine in exchange for the transfer of Donbas. The armed forces of Ukraine have taken control of the southern outskirts of Stepnohursk in the Zaporozhye region. The 210th Separate Assault Regiment is publishing footage of the fighting in this area. The footage shows that before a full sweep, artillery and drones target enemy concentrations. As usual, the Russians tried to infiltrate and concentrate in the urban area in small groups, but the defense forces detected and eliminated them in time. The 210th Regiment notes that the 1st Assault Battalion completed its mission without any personnel losses. The most critical sector of the front remains Pokrovsk in the Donetsk region. The enemy is advancing on the positions of our defenders near Volodymyrivka, Nikanorivka, and Chervoniy Lyman. Since the beginning of the day, the occupiers have carried out 27 attacks. These are the figures from the Strategic Command of the Armed Forces of Ukraine. Ukrainian defenders have already repelled 23 attacks. The fighting continues. The Commander-in-Chief of the Armed Forces of Ukraine, Syrsky, has allocated additional forces and resources to destroy enemy sabotage groups that are infiltrating behind the defensive line in the Pokrovsk sector. In particular, the 1st Azov National Guard Corps has been redeployed there. Russia wants to end the war in Ukraine by 2026. This was stated by Major General Vadim Skivitsky, Deputy Chief of the Main Intelligence Directorate of the Ministry of Defense of Ukraine, who is also a member of the Ukrainian delegation at the negotiations in Istanbul. The military official refers to Russian strategic documents, which specify this time frame. According to this information, the desire to end the fighting sooner is connected to the enormous economic costs of waging the war. Currently, they make up 42% of the country's budget and are causing stagnation in sectors such as metallurgy and the extraction of natural resources, particularly coal, the GUR representative noted. In addition, the Russian economy is under pressure from international sanctions. Skibitsky also drew attention to Belarus, which is trying to maintain a balance between supporting Russia and preserving its ties with the West. In his opinion, in this war, Lukashenko is determined to maintain neutrality at all costs. They will practice the use of nuclear weapons and Orshnik. The Ministry of Defense of the Republic of Belarus explained what the Russians and Belarusians will be doing during their joint military exercises. The combat coordination exercise is called West 2025 and will take place from September 12th to 16th. As previously stated by the occupiers, the purpose of the drills is to repel possible aggression and to test the Union State's ability to guarantee security. A spokesperson for the State Border Guard Service of Ukraine reported that several hundred Russian soldiers and several dozen pieces of equipment have already arrived in Belarus for the exercises scheduled for the fall. At present, they do not pose a military threat to Ukraine, the agency emphasized. There is no observed buildup of a large number of troops for a possible offensive. At the same time, intelligence units of the Ministry of Defense and the State Border Guard Service, together with their foreign counterparts, are constantly monitoring the possible further arrival of Russian units on the territory of Belarus. Our military does not rule out provocations from the Russians during these drills. European countries have also responded to the maneuvers. Poland conducted its own exercises, and Lithuania is strengthening its air defense. Estonia is reinforcing its border. Latvia is also taking appropriate security measures. Why is it important for Europe to closely monitor the course of these exercises? Andriy Kovalenko, head of the Center for Countering Disinformation at the National Security and Defense Council of Ukraine, explained this on the United News Marathon.
Everyone wants to show that they are capable of waging war in the Baltics with ease. Accordingly, there is an understanding that they cannot do this on their own. But there are no guarantees that someday they won't bring in North Korean troops, say, dressed in Russian military uniforms. 250,000 of them. No one can give such guarantees. That's why, of course, Europe needs to keep a close eye on these exercises right now, even more closely than we do.